So this is a follow-up video to my previous video on Spark and how they don't understand and cannot understand autism because they don't understand the basic concept of consent. They don't understand what autism really is. They don't understand you can't understand this by looking at the genes, and that's a silly idea. And so much more on a basic level, and these researchers do not respect the autistic community or even listen to them. So first of all, on the homepage, literally when you click on it, there's about how to collect saliva from unwilling patients, and I'll show you later that most of these patients are not consenting or unwilling that they're getting DNA samples for, a ridiculously high percentage. So, on this page, I'm going to read this quote. For Natalie Kuzco, a mother of twin girls who have autism, the most challenging part of joining Spark was collecting saliva samples. Saliva is an important component of Spark's research. Scientists collect DNA from saliva and then analyze the DNA for genes that are linked to autism. Kuzco's twins are young and easily overwhelmed, so she worried that they wouldn't be able to complete the process. It can take up to half an hour to collect the required teaspoon of spit. Kuzco had help from a staff member at the Seattle Children's Autism Center, which is a center known by many autistics to abuse autistic people and heavily profits over abusive therapies and more. So they get a lot of money from abusing autistic people and stigmatizing it. But back to the quote, who's developed different strategies to help collect saliva in children. The staff members sometimes count us to sing or sings to distract them or reduce stress. For those who have an especially hard time, he might spread the process over several sessions. So show them the collection sponge and practice the first steps of the process to help them get comfortable. In Kuzco's case, she collected the samples as the girls were sleeping in their car seats. This is a whole story about a young girl that did not understand what was going on, was unwilling to give saliva, and they figured out a special process to get it in her sleep. And many autistics develop speech and other abilities to communicate later on in life and look back at this and will be stressed, awful. She could have collected them when she was 18 or mature adult that could have given consent. And just because she can't give consent now that she's 5, doesn't mean she can't give consent. When she's 20, it will grow up to be a perfectly fine adult. But you took that option away from her. And then they give a list of ways to collect saliva from people that will not understand what the saliva is being collected for and not how to do it. For example, making it turn into games and not telling them what the purpose of the game is, such as a spitting game. Verbal praise or high fives. Taking breaks. Using toys that they might put saliva over. How to place the sponge in someone else's jaws so they get more saliva. How to stimulate saliva production. And what drinks to even give them. And much more. And then you wonder how much of the study is participants that cannot give consent or are too young. Well, first thing is the form talks about participating in study. None of the forms I could find about if you are a consenting adult giving the consent to participate in study, which is common for most studies. No, the first form I found, research participants in information and consent form, data consent from parents or LAR, legal authorized representative, and child. This whole form is if you're under 18 to collect the data, or if you're over 18, but you still have the legal guardian for some process of power of attorney. None of it is for you to give consent. You can look at this whole form. There's nowhere for the person that actually has the disorder to sign or give consent. It is all about them, and it talks about how to get legal authority over people they should not have over it. Yeah, that is awful in itself. Then you look at the amount of participants, over 90,000 individuals with ASD. That statement already has some red flags. 90,000 people with ASD. Well, over 9% of the autistic community likes identity first language, autistic individuals. They're going against what the community likes, which probably means they didn't talk to us. Why would they say with ASD is bad? Well, first of all, that language, which is now grammatically incorrect according to some journals, that language means that he's separating the autism, an individual. Autism is something to treat. That's what it at least makes it sound like. You don't go up to a person and say, to some identity like, I'm Jewish, but you don't say, person with Judaism. It makes Judaism sound just wrong or weird. You say, Jewish person. Doesn't mean my whole identity is being Jewish, but it's an important part of my identity. Same as with autism. And there's so much stigma, and I've literally received threats on my life because, now they were bogus, but threats on my life because I said I prefer to be called autistic individual because someone said I'm making autism look good. So it's a big deal that they're not listening to respect. And they spend time, they would notice that in every autistic group. So, okay, but back to the data. 90,000 individuals. 77,000 of those individuals were under 18, and the consent was given by the parents, not by them. That means over 85% of the trial participants did not give consent. That is a ridiculously high number. Why can't you get more autistic adults at all unless you're up to something shady? Then there's 13,000 something adults with it, almost 14,000 adults. When I looked at the data, again, I could not find a single data point of them saying how much of those gave consent themselves. They listed independent and dependent adults together. They kept lists, and most of them were pretty young, and most of them, and looking at the data, it says most of them participants were not independent. So I really doubt that it had a large scale dependent. It's probably more like 90% bogus. Then you have then you take these stories about how to collect data from super young participants, such as the quote I put it, and they make whole stories about how the heroism of these families to do it. The previous people I was talking about, they were about 2 years and 3 months when they're diagnosed. And it doesn't say exact age, but yeah, this is a picture taken shortly after they say that. And then they talk all about how to get DNA from unwilling ones and how they're a specialist. And then here they say that they put their kid in ABA therapy, a common evidence-based therapy for autism, has made enormous difference for the daughters. And they put her in 8 hours, more than 8 hours a day. That's after school. That means that's more than most people work. 8 hours a day, that's in a week, that's over 56 hours of therapy. That kid cannot be a kid. ABA therapy, and I will show the data, has, in the sources, over 80% of the people that go through ABA therapy say they have severe PTSD. Over 70% of them attempt suicide at these centers. Yeah, that's the theory they're promoting. There's no evidence that it increases the rate of development of anything. What the evidence was based on were studies done in the 60s and 50s that had no control group of people not, the autistic, not in the therapy, compared to normal children by the therapist. The other ones they looked at, common reported, was behavior, and the behavior was assessed by the therapist giving the therapy or by the parents, not by the people in the therapy. And these behaviors included stuff as, do they play like normal people? Do they make normal eye contact? Do they talk like normal? They stressed being normal. They didn't stress the well-being of the child. and they were subjective measures. Then some of them were later blind, and they did not find any evidence in most of these blind studies, but the blind studies they did find evidence for, you can still tell it a kid was in therapy because they were at the same center receiving the blind assessment. And you could tell these little things when a kid's been in 8 hours of therapy, they conditioned to be normal, that might give off they're in therapy. So many things, and there's so many comparative interests. And in Canada and the US, the laws supporting arbor therapy has found no evidence at all that arbor therapy works. So, yeah, pretty weird. And also, arbor therapy is sponsored at the Seattle Children's Autism Center. So, really, again, very suspect. Very, very suspect. You look at the experts they employ, and they have great speeches where they promote eye contact. So, yes, sexual orientation, gender identity, and autism spectrum disorder. Really big difference. Many males have been, almost always it's cisgender males that get diagnosed. It's really horrible. There's a lot of female autistics that do not get what they need, on also transsexuals. And then there's also just non-binary, non-cisgender folks that just don't get the recognition they deserve. Sexual orientation plays a role in not getting the attention you deserve. There's a lot of awful things. The early founders of arbor therapy that I just previously talked about was a gay conversion therapist. He got idea from conversion therapy. So huge ideas about intersection. And we could talk about dating, how it can be more complicated for autistic individuals because of communication problems and ableism. Instead, this woman focuses on eye contact to understand gender identity. This non-autistic woman test looks at eye contact to understand gender identity and sexual identity instead of talking to autistic individuals. When there's a whole organization, Autism Women Network, there's also organizations for non-binary autistics. There's whole big ones, and I follow some of them that talk about the subject led by autistic people, but instead they have one on eye contact. And I listened to her talks, I read her paper and work, and it's so just fucked up, plainly that. She believes that we do not develop to be sexually typical or understand the full means and implications of sex and everything, and we don't understand gender identity and gender itself, whatever this not understanding means, and we're not typical because we don't make eye contact and therefore can't understand other people or express emotions. Then she talks about the higher rates of sexual abuse we experience and rape, which you don't need to make eye contact for someone to know that you not consent. Consenting needs to be as clear as possible. No means no. Only thing that means yes is a very, very clear yes. Everything else is also no. But we have to make eye contact. That's why we get sexually abused. Again, these people don't understand consent. This proves more they don't understand consent. And they have a bunch of people on their site. They can look at all these people on the site and all the lectures. None of them are by, single one of them are by autistic people. All of them are blaming autism and how bad it is. And all of them about the families of it. How messed up. You can't get a single autistic group to talk about autism? What is this telling you? And how can a group of people say they can study disorder when they can't understand eye contact doesn't lead to people getting raped? When they blame people for being sexually atypical and gender atypical, they don't define it, but it sounds pretty anti-LGBTQ+. I don't think they can understand their blame when they have so much bias already against us. They need to talk to us. Yeah. Then they found only in 3% of the population they studied are doing the strongly linked to one, and 10% slightly. So out of the 90,000 individuals, less than 9,000 they found something. Okay. A lot of these individuals are closely related. So there's going to be even less diversity in there. Then if you look at it, they have in this list over 188 changes they found. most of them in a few individuals, which you can look up the math, 9,000 divided by 188, there's not going to be ones that are very common. Average is like, you could say most 100 individuals. A lot of them is going to be less because it's repeat. It's not going to be that well. And you find it in people without it. So very weak associations. Then they match these people up with families and other people with similar genes. And then they use that to generalize, Fox P1, they say, for example, always gives severe language impairments and disorders. They're basing that on less than 10 individuals. That could easily just not be correlation. That could easily just be correlation, not causation. And you're also coming from a very biased stand. Do you mean not good communication that can't make eye contact? They talk in an atypical way that's perfectly fine if you listened? I don't know it. They are so biased from the beginning and don't understand consent. That how can you trust these results and they have so little data? Then you look at, this is the math I'm talking about, where they put together people with similar disorders and they start generalizing to make it sound more important, and they fearmonger, so parents get very afraid. And then you can look at all these other things, and it's just all the same story. All the same story. And they don't tell you about all the messed up people they've had. They say it would end the stigma, but no, they're not ending the stigma. They're ending the stigma of poor parenting causes it, not ending the stigma of it being treated. And they get funded tens of millions of dollars that could go to helping us. And again, if you can't, I want to finish this up with one simple statement. Genes don't tell you how a person thinks. And they're not going to tell us in a long, long time. Imagine trying to understand the world by looking at everything, trying to understand the beats by looking at a particle of sand. You're not going to understand the whole beats, maybe a tiny aspect of the beats. Imagine trying to understand human psychology by learning basic chem. You're not going to understand. We, as I previously said, don't understand how genes work at all, almost inheritance, and it's so much more complicated. Then we're taking something so far removed, how the brain works. The brain is one of the most complex things in the world. It has over 1 billion neurons, has more connections than the stars in the galaxy. We don't understand anything about the brain. And they hear like dopamine makes you happy or dopamine makes you anxious. We've proven that simplified picture is wrong, that there's not an exact correlation. Serotonin, too, there's not exact correlation. And all these other brain chemicals, there's really an iffy correlation, but it's the best we understand it. And we also we thought for a long time social interactions needed to be intelligent, but then we have octopuses. There's no good explanation why we're intelligent based on biology and monkeys are not, or whales should be so much more intelligent than they are. Yes, they're intelligent, but they have massive brains. Why can't they think beyond our level? So much we don't know about the brain. But the way we learn about the brain, people, and society is not by studying chemistry or the basics as much as talking to those people, including them in the research, and going out and trying to communicate with them. And they can't do this. They've shown that they can't talk to us, so they will not understand us. This money, if you want to understand autism, talk to autistic individuals. We learn so much more about the brain. And our research is so messed up because we ignore it. We come in with preserved biases. I cannot understand another group of people, any group of people, unless I try to interact with them. If I try to understand them by just looking at molecules, I can't. Do you think any of these families know what MT8s are? MT8s, FR5 gene mutations mean and do? And I've heard some of these families talk like it's the worst mutation ever. Well, that mutation appears in 25% of Hispanics, 15% of Caucasians. That's the next study that they gave the numbers was weird with the racial breakdown. It didn't make too much sense. And they were like, this gene mutation is the worst one ever. None of them knew what that gene mutation even does. And then they're like, this one does the horrible. But no one even knows what that gene does. It was a very weak link in correlation. But they were so fearful that it was awful. So please, don't look at this society in any way as a good society or campaign. They're not going to teach us anything. Thank you very much, and please hit the subscribe button. Will mean so much for me. Comment and like if you really want to, and please share it with your friends. Thank you, and my videos do get better with time. I got a mic and better equipment, but I need to hook up. I've gotten many wonderful suggestions on improving this. Thank you, and bye.